we have now the next session lined up for you. It's going to be a really mightily interesting discussion with a wonderful friend of ours whose name is Paul Newnham. And Paul is, of course, the founder, the magnificent founder of the SDG2 Advocacy Hub, which is bringing all the global chefs in and around the SDGs. How can we change the world into a better place through food? And Paul, we're really not here today to talk about your work, which of course involves hundreds and hundreds of chefs in dozens of countries across the world, and you work with the United Nations and their new food initiative, etc., etc. But I'm mostly here with you to tap into your brain regarding the question of what food can do for us and our planet when we think one step further, and what chefs can do with it as well. Okay, so Paul, good to have you here. I will give you a couple of seconds nonetheless to introduce the SDG2 Advocacy Hub and understand what chefs can do to actually have us achieve the SDGs.
Yeah, thank you, Johan. It's so great to be with you. I wish I was there in person, but unfortunately, in this current reality that we're in, it's a little challenging, but it feels like it. I've been watching the team eating just before and just can feel the engagement going on. It's always great to see, and I'm hoping that next year we'll be back in person together in Sweden. So yeah, as you mentioned, I am engaged in leading the Sustainable Development Goal 2 Advocacy Hub, which looks at private sector, UN, civil society groups around food, ag, and nutrition. And one of the things we developed was a framework for chefs called the Chef's Manifesto, which is connecting the work that chefs are doing around the world to the UN Sustainable Development Goals, which is the plan that all world leaders signed on to in 2015 to address some of the biggest issues we face. And so it's really great to be working with chefs from over 90 countries now that are acting locally to really drive change on different issues. And that work is continuing to grow. We're partnering with lots of different organizations, and the chefs are really making a change in everything from fine dining through to corporate catering, lots of different experiences of food, from food development through to education, and really trying to think about that sort of sustainability, about how do we not only feed people, but also look at the way to drive solutions for people and planet to create good food for all in some way. And so it's exciting this year when there's obviously quite some challenges globally, but also huge opportunities happening. And we have a UN Food System Summit this year and a whole range of other activations. And it's really good to see some of the conversations around food. And so great to be at the big meet with you guys and to be chatting together. And yeah, great to be here.
Thank you so much for those warm words, Paul. And of course, we hope to see you live next year. I think sometimes we underestimate the power of chefs out there as change agents. And the reason for bringing in Paul to this conversation is that we have an hypothesis here. And it really is based on the same issue that Mark Buckley brought up the other day, which is, of course, Earth Overshoot Day, which in Sweden happens at the beginning of April, which is super early and super embarrassing as well. And when you take a look at the future, what are we supposed to consume? I'm not sure we can consume anything similar to what we're consuming today, which is cars, sneakers, clothes, everything fast. We also have the concept of, planned obsolescence, where products actually are planned to cease to work after a couple of years, something that anyone who's ever owned a modern cell phone can testify to. But in the future, I think we all can realize that food is one of the few things that we can actually consume because it replenishes itself. It's regenerative in the best sense. And that also means that we have a sense probably out there that is taste, and that we haven't developed fully as a human species yet, because we just eat a few things out of the many thousands and thousands and thousands of things that are edible and that can be combined into new experiences. On top of that, we have the whole tech development with lab grown and the potential to construct basically any type of food in the future. However, with all that richness when it comes to produce, we need someone to interpret that for us and to ultimately package this into an experience. And none other than the chefs can do that for us. So, Paul, the future role of the chef, is that really to operate a restaurant, or is that to be guides to a good life?
Yeah. Look, it's a fascinating question that you're raising there, Johan, because you're raising a question which is also very timely in so many parts of the world. With lockdown and change that's happened in so many parts of the world due to COVID, the world changed very fast. In many parts. I was in the UK when the COVID hit, and restaurants were shut for many months. And this meant that chefs' roles in food had to change very quickly as well. And they really felt that. And that's happened in many different parts of the world. I was talking to chefs in India at the moment that are really struggling. Other parts of the world where rolling lockdowns have just had to make them really rethink the whole approach. And restaurants have been these gathering places, these areas in which people do come together, and they also play a role in different levels on development, innovation, experience, curating those kinds of things. And so, as the world is changing, so does the restaurant. And so I think as we move forward, and also think about the impacts that we're having on the planet, we also have to think about how that looks. I think one of the things that, when you were just talking, that stick out the most to me is the element of culture and how culture plays into food. And one of the things around, we've developed cultures of consumption, but we can also change those cultures. And if you go backwards, you think about the regenerative natures of different communities, indigenous communities, different food communities that have existed for many thousands of years in different ways. And there's a lot to learn from some of those communities. And so in some ways, going into the future is also going back. But I think, in our world in which we've become disconnected, yet we're so connected, it's interesting about the role of a chef, because the chef is a bridge. The chef bridges between ingredients and people. And so they almost go to where these ingredients are that we need to consume, to eat, to enjoy, to engage with, that tie to our culture, our society, in so many different ways, our identity, religion, all kinds of elements, these ingredients come. And the chefs bring them together, remembering the past, but also thinking about the future. And I think they curate these experiences for us that we get to then taste, to enjoy. But I think it's more than just that. It's also to nourish us, to give us the nutrition that we need, to educate us about how to eat. And there's obviously been a growth in lots of parts of the world about consumption, and that played into the food space, where it's about eating more and trying, eating lots and lots and lots. And I think as we go forward, what we're seeing in lots of the forward-thinking conversations, it's about diversity. It's about eating different things. It's about quality. It's about getting the nutrients, the elements. It's about the benefits to planet. So it's like thinking about these other layers. And that's something that we, do a lot with chefs that work in the Chef's Manifesto, and the frameworks that, the partners that we have, is that we're working with chefs who are like leaning into areas such as waste, into biodiversity, into human nutrition, and looking at not only how do they do that in their own restaurant, but also how do those innovations then go beyond their restaurant. And so as restaurants shut, a lot of chefs moved into food service for vulnerable communities. There was chefs in Bangkok that put on, pivoted straight away to doing, feeding hospitality workers that were out of work. I know chefs in India doing the same at the moment, chefs in London, I'm sure in Sweden, that have pivoted when their kitchens couldn't open straight away, because the idea of hospitality is about bringing people together and meeting those needs. And they use their skills to do that. So I think it's fascinating as you raise these questions about the future to think about the role chefs play.
I think that this is excellent, Paul. This is absolutely magic, because when we see chefs these days, it's like people in the kitchen somewhere throwing out plates of food to be served to us at the table, and then of course we pay and leave. It's sometimes a shitty life, because it's a lot of hard work, and really you don't get credit for all the stuff that you know and that you could bring. And that's not just in the kitchen. As you say, a lot of chefs actually became community leaders instead. Last time around we had Marcus Samuelsson, which is a super chef in New York, come in and speak about this, and he basically said, no, I retrained myself from being a chef to a community leader. We of course have Jose Andres in the US who helped a lot of people, serving food to them in soup kitchens, basically, instead of his super, menu-starred restaurant. And it's also about culture, and it's also about social connection. So, do you think that chefs can really understand the value, or do they understand the value they could play in the future society, or do we need to educate the chefs as well?
Look, I think definitely there. I mean, it's very hard to generalize, Johan, as you know, because as soon as you say, I could answer that question every way and be right, but I would say that chefs are starting to really continue to step forward. So you've got lots of bright stories which you can share, like some of the Marcus and Jose, and like Jose's in India at the moment, went straight over into the middle of really challenging to really work on meeting needs. There's so many chefs that are doing this. There's so many chefs that we don't know their names that are doing it quietly on the side. They're running, there's chefs that have moved, even chefs from very famous restaurants that have left, number one, number two restaurants in the world and gone and opened up school canteen. Dan Gustu from Noma went to set up the brigade and doing school meals in the East Coast of the US. There's been lots of these kinds of transitions where people have used their skills, their experience, their, in some ways also celebrity, because we do really engage with food in a way of, it's a currency, and so the celebrity of that to actually drive change and drive difference. Massimo Bottura with the Refettorio. And what they've done is also not just talked about food, they've talked about how food comes together. So they've talked more about hospitality, this idea of bringing people together, this idea of the table, the idea of valuing and respecting. When we sit and eat together, it's an equalizer. Even just watching as we came in, the guys were all tasting. Every single one would have a slightly different approach, opinion. There's billions of experts in this world on food because we're all an expert on what we like. And so it's how you engage in that. So I think chefs are very much awake. They're very much engaging. And I think, one of the things we really believe is to bring them into the room and get them talking with scientists, get them at the front line so they have the information to really inform what they're doing. But chefs are doing it on so many levels. And you see that in, big catering companies to small restaurants. It's not, it's kind of crossed the line somewhat, where now you're starting to see that transform. And different parts of the world are out in front. But, I think you do see these examples in all continents of the world at the moment.
Paul, when we talk about chefs now and their roles for the future, one thing springs to mind, that is, of course, that food is probably the biggest lever that we have on planet Earth. I mean, on the roll up behind you, we see the Chef's Manifest, and right on top of that, you see food is life. And that
Yeah.
actually is something that we spoke about yesterday with a wonderful thinker, Carolyn Steele, and her new
Yeah.
book, Zootopia, which means food place, right? And
Yeah.
food is life, which means that food is not just food, it's something else. And when food becomes life, and food is the largest lever that we have on the planet because it's the biggest thing we have, both in economic terms and, of course, we need it in order to survive, right? Can we use food in order to shift the planet entirely in a different direction? Can we make chefs the future presidents and world leaders, pushing food and us as a species into something that is better than what we have now?
Look, I think that's absolutely possible. I think the thing is, chefs are able to relate to people on a sensory level, and they get instant feedback. If you're in a kitchen and you put something on in front of someone, they taste it and they tell you pretty quickly whether they like it or not. You can tell in their face. So they're very good, judges of people. They can understand and read, people. They also have to bring together teams, which is really essential for moving things forward. And they build community, because if you think about a restaurant, if you think about any food business, it's all only as good as its suppliers. It's only as good as its farmers. It's only as good as its staff. It's only as good as its customers. It's all of those things that come together that create an amazing restaurant. And so when you think about the challenges of even this COVID time, where there's been breaks in that, you've seen then what's happened, where you've seen the breakdown of parts of our community, of our coming together. And then as we've reopened, we come back together and the meeting spot starts. So if you think about world leaders and you think about the ability for our future of our planet, I definitely think there is that opportunity for chefs to step forward. I think one of the things that I see is lots of chefs are very practical and pragmatic, though, and they're very focused on getting it done. And so they don't like sometimes the talk, like they want to see action. And so they're very much, they don't tolerate a lot of that debate. So what they want is to see action. And I think that's one of the things we are going to need as the planet continues to cross into emergency areas in so many different ways around human health and planetary health, is we need people that can act. And so it could be a good opportunity for some chefs to really step up into that space.
Okay, so when it comes to, so Dan Barber for president, I think that needs to be one of the things.
You heard it here. You heard it here.
Yeah. Dan, you heard it here. Let's do it. I'll become your vice president. No, I'm not born in the U.S. But chefs. Sometimes you can feel that chefs are also, to a certain extent, stuck in a food system. They have to work with what they can lay their hands on, and that's most often products that have been, industrialized, produced through industrial methods, etc. We also must stay a little bit on the topic of biodiversity here. Could we really change also the value chains here? Last year, we spoke together with you and a chef, Pinky Mariping, from South Africa. We spoke about how could we move the table back to the farm again. How can we really integrate the chefs and the producers of amazing food, and not just the top chefs, because they already do this, right? But every chef out there. Can we use them in order to change the food system entirely into something that's more biodiverse?
Yeah, no, I definitely see that we can. And I mean, look, a lot of conversations were, how do you get people cooking more, for example? All of a sudden, cooking's gone up because people have been home and restaurants have been shut. So there's been change is very possible. And there's been a huge focus on health and people's, nutrition and knowing about your immunity and your vulnerability to disease. And I think, one of the things COVID's done is really just highlighted and brought these invisible things that we took for granted to become visible. And this is everywhere in the world, where people are aware that health is important. And health is vulnerable. And it's not something we can just take for granted. So if you think about biodiversity and you think about the types of foods we're eating, people are much more aware of where does our food come from, asking questions about its benefit to us, like how does it help us? And one of the easiest ways to do that is to eat different things. And to be eating a diversity of things, fruits and vegetables, different grains and nuts, different, all kinds of ocean foods, and by just having a diversity, you increase your benefit. And so I see that that's very possible. The other thing that gives me hope is things like the UN Food System Summit, which is, it's not a food summit, it's a food system summit. And I think what's unique about that is that this is about now a food system and recognizing that this is systemic and recognizing that in a system, everyone has a role to play. And so this is not just a food conference, which is the Secretary General suggested to happen with the food agencies. It's also bringing in the environment agencies, the health organization, the refugee groups, the certification, all the different elements that come into a UN system, but also the government departments that are involved in that and the civil society groups to have a conversation about the system. And so that involves chefs, that involves others. And so I think, when you see that kind of thinking, that's the way you can start to drive change at that system level. That's the way you can start to take these ideas, which maybe have been available at that fine dining level, and they can start to become, more mainstream. And you're seeing that in certain parts of the world. So you're seeing, big changes. Like I know in the UK, in the supermarket space, you've seen investors gathering together and accelerating change for supermarkets. Like Tesco, one of the largest supermarkets, investors came to the board and said, we need to change, and accelerate because obesity numbers are going up in the UK. We don't think you're going fast enough. And that drove significant jumps forward in the way that they were seeing what's on the shelf. And they're pulling out a huge number of lines and adding in a whole range of others. And so I think, Johan, at the moment, those kinds of things are sparked through conversations, chefs telling us about ingredients, farmers, scientists raising the awareness. But then they transform when they start to reach everyone everywhere. When people start to go, what's that? Is there a different version of that? How does that help me? How does this help me, be healthy and get those nutrients? So I think there's a whole public engagement campaign change going on at the moment, and it needs to accelerate. We need to not get distracted. We need to drive that forward, but championing all of the importance of the biodiversity that it's being held very vulnerably and we could lose, I think I'm hoping going to drive us to start to take that seriously and really look at how we bring that and make that more accessible for all.
Wonderful. Okay, so what do you think about the UN Food System Summit here? Will there be a lot of results coming out or a lot of hot air coming out of it?
Look, I mean, I'm a big believer that it's really important. It's really, really critical time. And I think, we're at this point on the Sustainable Development Goals where we've got 9 years to go. It's still not halfway. We're still behind. We've got a lot going against us in some ways, but we also really need to now work together to drive it forward. And I think food systems is one area which can drive so many others. And so I think the summit is great for a range of reasons. One, it's bringing together people that don't normally come together. So it's bringing together people from all different groups. So they've been hosting dialogues at the global level, the national level, and the independent level. Food system dialogues where they bring people together to talk. Now, you could say that's hot air, but it's also the first step to building bridges is to listen. It's to dialogue. It's to be done in a respectful way where you start to understand others' perspective. And that's what's happening in these dialogues. I've been involved in a number, and I'm seeing people come together and share ideas. We've done a number with chefs, and you see chefs that work in school canteens through to fine dining, talking to each other about the realities, talking to each other about what they each face. And that helps shift their understandings. It helps to build bridges, to build engagement. So I see that's really, really important. And I think that leads to a mindset change. And I think mindset change is one of the biggest challenges we face. So obviously, the community around Sweden Food Tech have a very forward-thinking, open mind around the future. They see opportunity, they see the role technology can play, but not everyone does. Not everyone has that open mind. A lot of people feel, it's very limited. There's not opportunity. And so I think the summit is about shifting mindsets. It's about helping to build relationships. And then it's also about driving commitment. And there is a number of commitments starting to form. There's a pre-summit in July in Rome, and that's going to hopefully bring a lot of that to the table. And then between then and September, when the Secretary General calls the summit alongside the UN General Assembly with world leaders, you'll see commitments come through. Will it go as far as we need it to, Johan, and we hope for? Of course not. It never will go that far because we have very high ambition. But will it move us significantly forward? Absolutely, 100%, because it has to.
I think you're absolutely right, Paul. And it kind of is a pesky question, and I put it because I think one of the great things about the UN Food System Summit is that you are there with chefs. And as you point out, chefs are doers. They're not just talkers. And that brings me a lot of hope for actually good things coming out of this. I have a suggestion for you all. Why don't we train everyone as a chef? That's the first thing in school. Train everyone to become chefs, and then a lot of things will fall in place automatically. By the way, we have a question from the audience. It says, it's such an important point about all the players in the system, Paul. What role do you think sustainable food accelerators should play in that?
Yeah, I think definitely. So, when you're moving things forward, you need people in all different parts. You need people that are pioneers out in front, really, finding new ideas, making new connections, innovating, and really doing that. You then need groups that are behind them to really accelerate those findings and really drive them forward. And so I think there's definitely roles. There's roles from the science through to the action, through to the data and the reporting. And so if we're going to move forward, we need to create circles that are moving and iterating very fast and speed them up. We don't want to see this as a linear process that has a beginning and an end. We need this to be a constant circle, rolling, getting faster and faster to really keep, implementing, accelerating, learning, evaluating, moving forward, innovating, because we're going to make lots of mistakes. But the good thing is that's okay. And, it's part of the best inventions, the best things that are about our world have been done through making mistakes and then moving and fixing them fast. What we have to do is move forward, keep moving forward. So I think food accelerators play a key role. I think if people are interested in the summit, they should really go to the summit website. They should follow along the conversation on all the socials and everything, and then really see if they can move that, get involved themselves.
Okay, I think those words have to be the final words. Thank you so much, Paul, for joining us today in this wonderful talk, and I look forward to all these future conversations with you. Best of luck with the UN Food System Summit. We will for sure follow it closely. Take care, and bye for now.
Thank you. Thanks, Johan.